Before we get into things, the game I'm talking about today was provided to me by the publisher for review, or rather generalized as coverage. This brings up a rather interesting point for me. This video was not supposed to be about this game. After my Rain World lore video, I took a week to relax and really think about what I wanted to talk about next. I got playing a game called Mortal Shell, a Souls-like with an interesting premise. Mortal Shell is the game I originally intended to talk about in this video, but something changed. So please allow me a moment to offer you a peek behind the curtain of someone who plays and analyzes video games for YouTube as a hobby. There are sites that exist which allow you as a content creator to request copies of games for review. Naturally, the developer or publisher hopes that by reviewing their game you will draw more attention to it, and thus the smaller your audience, the less likely you are to get a review copy. It's just smart business. Why give someone a copy of the game when they may only reach 4 people? As my audience saw a significant increase from the last video, I was checking my eligibility for new offers and I stumbled upon Sable. Now, Sable is a game that I didn't even know existed up till this point. It flew entirely under the radar for me. I'm clicking through the screenshots, contemplating whether you all here would like this game, and next thing I know, I accidentally clicked a button and I've been immediately approved for a copy. Whoops. So now I have 30 days to make a video on it. Here's the thing about Sable. It released in September. No, not last September, but September 2 years ago. Now, I personally find it bad practice to request copies of games that have been out for a while. It seems disrespectful. What wider an audience will I reach for a game that's already had its fair shake at the world? Yet here I sit, with a copy of Sable, and so I started it up. Sable is something truly magical. A strange hybrid of pure science fiction with dialogue straight out of a book and Breath of the Wild. Though, of course, being an indie title, it's a bit less polished, and I say we forgive it for that. In Sable, you play as, well, isn't it obvious? You play as Sable, a member of the Ibeksi, a nomadic sort that wander the deserts. Here's the thing about this video. You'll notice it's much shorter than my previous retrospective on Rain World, which may cause some concern, given I said this would also be a retrospective. This game presents its world to you much differently than Rain World does, and that makes it hard to approach the story in the same way. You see, while someone can, and I suspect many people in fact have, play through Rain World and not get even a sliver of what's going on, Sable welcomes you in with open arms. It isn't obtuse. It doesn't have hidden bits of lore that you have to haul across the entire game world just to piece together the history of it. I can make an hour-and-a-half video on Rain World, and I did, you should check it out. And at the end of it, you can still go play Rain World and experience a fantastic game. But for Sable, it's different. That isn't a bad thing by any means, but it's an important distinction to make. To talk about the entire story of Sable is to rob you of Sable. The gameplay is the story. So instead of delving into the nitty-gritty details of what exactly happens and where, I'm going to paint you a picture of this world. Because I'm about to get into more spoiler-related subjects here, as vague as that may be in this case, I'm going to touch on performance first. Now, I personally have not had any performance issues up till this point, and I'm playing on a Steam Deck. But that doesn't mean they don't exist. The Steam reviews and discussion forums have a pretty vocal group of people who mention this. They aren't trolls, and in fact many state that they love the game despite these performance issues, but that it definitely worsens their experience. The developers have seemingly continued updates and bug fixes without actually addressing the underlying problem, as the comments on the most recent update from December of last year ask why they refuse to acknowledge these issues. Like I said, I haven't seen anything like this personally, but I don't think it would be right of me to sell you on this game, turn you away with a spoiler warning, and then mention the performance problems at the end of the video. It's something to be on the lookout for at the very least. Alright, so here's the spoiler warning. Like I said, I'm not really going to talk about the story, as the story is the reason you'd want to play this game. Instead, I'm going to talk about how this game builds up its world and the feelings it stirs in me, but I'm going to back these feelings up by referencing various in-game places and events. If you want to go in completely blind, this game is best summarized as wholesome Mandalorian Breath of the Wild without combat, or Shadow of the Colossus but with little towns, fetch quests, and no colossi. But both of those descriptions really do a disservice to the depth of the experience here. I think this spoiler warning is mostly unnecessary, but as always, my video will still be here when you get back. It's also worth noting that just because the experience is deep, it doesn't mean it's long or tedious. Much like Shadow of the Colossus, I'd say it's on the shorter side, a handful of hours. Maybe let's estimate 7 to 10 if you're not rushing through it and just taking your time. It doesn't seem to have anything like the Korok seeds in Legend of Zelda, dozens of little collectibles, but if you are trying to get everything, I'd say double that estimation. So where were we? We were talking about our main character, Sable, a teenage girl of the Ibexi tribe. The first thing that struck me about Sable was how involved her internal monologue is. When you strike up a conversation with nearly anyone, you'll spend the first text box or so, and then some throughout, seeing her thoughts. How the person makes her feel, how their clothing reminds her of such and such, how they came to be a part of her tribe despite being an outsider. It's all very deliberate and incredibly gripping. It isn't video game dialogue, it's book dialogue. That really struck me because, and you'll have to excuse me for this as someone who shies away from visual novel type games, I haven't really seen this done. More often than not, video games have a very direct and specific sort of dialogue, in my opinion. It never feels like I'm talking to a person with their own ambitions and goals in the world. It feels like I'm clicking through a dialogue tree. Not the case here. These characters have a history that extends far beyond you or I picking this game up to play it. The whole world does. That's not a unique concept by any stretch of the imagination. Hyrule has always been there, flooded or otherwise. The souls of lords were split long before we ever arrived in Lordran. But Sable does an exceptional job of making it feel unique. So what is it exactly that Sable does? Well, this is a coming-of-age story. Sable has reached the appropriate age for her tribe to send her on her gliding, a tradition where she is granted a special stone that allows her to glide through the air and land harsh falls without getting hurt. The end goal of her journey being to figure out what she wants to be. You'll notice the Ibexi wear masks. Everyone does. These masks designate their jobs. Merchants have specific masks, cartographers have different ones, and so on. In order to acquire these masks, Sable must help the various people she meets along the way with tasks. Helping them will reward you with a badge. Get enough of these badges and you can trade them for a mask. There are puzzles, of course, simple little dungeons and such, climbing puzzles which are a lot of fun, trying to find the best way to scale a building or cliff, driving around through the dunes to see if any of them are low enough for you to see what's up top. It's all very simple in terms of the gameplay loop. In fact, I'm going to be honest, I keep falling asleep playing this game. I say this as a positive, this is relaxing stuff. I'll fire it up at night to play in bed. As I've said, I've been playing on my Steam Deck, which, again, I haven't had any issues with. And next thing I know, I'm waking up a couple hours later. It's almost like time travel. Again, this is an absolute positive for me. I think it's difficult to find a game that is capable of lulling you to sleep while also being compelling enough that you're disappointed that it means you have to turn it off for the night. I have trouble sleeping too, so it's nothing to scoff at. It's far from boring. In fact, I think I had a similar experience with Breath of the Wild, though to a lesser degree, as the risk of combat does make it a bit more tense at times. I'd liken it to getting so sucked into a book that you fall asleep reading it. Now, you'd be forgiven for immediately assuming the graphics, which really aid in the somniferous nature of this game, are too simple. I was under the same impression, but then I discovered the ruins of a crashed ship and noticed the detail inside. The juxtaposition here of nature and industrialization is seen quite frequently, and it does a fantastic job of illustrating the contrast. It's cold, it's claustrophobic. The gray-blue reflective lighting washes out all of the colors, and then you step outside again and you can breathe. Each of the different regions of Midden, that's the planet we're on, though dialogue is referred to us directly as humans, so that's something I'll leave for you to investigate, have wildly different color palettes as well, making all of them feel varied and unique. The jagged ruins crumbling into the earth draped in vines. The spiraling architecture of the cartographer's tower filled with shelves and books. The rooftops of the city with its tight alleyways and tint slums. The world feels lived in, despite the loneliness, despite the vast desert, and it is still very much alive and breathing. I don't want to downplay how big of a role the soundtrack plays in this, composed by Japanese Breakfast. It's absolutely beautiful and without a doubt escapes the classification of video game OST. There are links in the description if you'd like to purchase this directly outside of the game. I'm not affiliated with it in any way, of course. It looks like there's even some vinyl still floating around at the time of this video's posting, and I'm a sucker for vinyl. Back to the gameplay itself, at a point rather early on in the story, I came across a scrapper asking for scrap metal. We had a chat, and briefly, Sable wondered about how many people take their gliding and don't actually use it to figure out what they want to be, instead using it as a reprieve, a last hurrah before adulthood. Maybe they already know what they want to be going into it. This is something that, in my opinion, you see a lot in my neck of the woods. I don't know how prevalent it is in other places, but growing up, there was a lot of societal pressure to know what you wanted to be as soon as you graduated high school. The culture seems to be shifting as time goes on, but it's definitely still present. Here's your diploma. I hope you know exactly what you want to do for the rest of your life. Going to college can stave this off a bit, but even then you have to have some general idea of the field you want to go into, or you'll end up wasting a lot of time and money. Is it really fair to expect someone to know what they want to do for the rest of their life as soon as their life has really begun at 18? Of course, this isn't an ideal world, fair doesn't matter, but I like Sable's approach. What if instead of that pressure to decide right away, you discovered it through experiences? I like climbing and making maps. I'm going to be a cartographer. I like getting my hands dirty. I'm going to be a machinist. What if you didn't have to decide forever at all? I'm not here to dictate how you play video games, but Sable isn't one of those games I think you should 100%. I think it does the game a disservice, but I do absolutely think it's a game you should experience. If you do, leave a comment about it. Tell me what mask you end up with, if any. As for me, I'm still figuring it out, and I think that's alright. I'd like to thank the publisher again for providing me with a review copy of this game, even if it was an accidental on my part. And I want to thank the patrons, something I didn't get to do vocally last time as I felt it lessened the impact of my previous video. I'd also like to say, hey, sorry this video didn't exactly turn into a retrospective like I'd hoped it would. I'd rather have a video with some integrity than spoil everything in a game like this, and when I first started playing it, I didn't know it was a game like this. We'll be back to the real retrospectives with Mortal Shell, assuming I can make heads or tails of what's going on in it. And I'd like to do one on Grime, too. I'm also hoping to look into Tunic soon, but I'm under the impression it too is an experience entirely spoiled by talking about it, so plenty of stuff lined up if you've stuck with me this far. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time.